ゴキブリだ。
大事なのは勝つことじゃない。
ヒーローだけだとプロレスつまんないじゃないですか。
立てゴキブリ。
人生のチャンピオンベルトをつかめ。
マスクを取った。
パパは悪者チャンピオン。
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Dom Griffin. I'm a film critic and you guys are watching the Armchair Auteur. It's an ongoing video project where I talk about movies. If you're the kind of person that enjoys watching nerds talk at length about film, you should really consider subscribing below. Today we're going to be reviewing a film called My Dad is a Heel Wrestler. It is a Japanese film that technically I think came out last year in Japan, but is only available streaming stateside like more recently. And because I'm a giant wrestling nerd, as I have talked to you guys about in previous videos, I decided it would be a good idea to review the film. Now, My Dad is a Heel Wrestler is a little bit unlike the other wrestling movie I reviewed recently, WWE and Netflix's The Main Event, which I reviewed a couple weeks ago. That movie is like very kind of cartoony and kiddie and very like Disney Channel. And what really struck me about My Dad is a Heel Wrestler is that the movie itself is like a regular movie. A friend of mine who is also a huge fan of Japanese pro wrestling told me about the movie. I mean, I knew about it, but like I forgot that it was like actually available to stream now. And the way he described it to me was like, it's the kind of movie he could like see at like his local art house. It's not like what you think when you picture a movie about wrestling starring actual wrestlers. Japan's biggest wrestling promotion is a promotion called New Japan Pro Wrestling, and they're the ones sort of behind this movie. They're like, it's kind of difficult to call them the WWE equivalent in Japan because they're nowhere near that large. But in terms of like popularity and like name recognition, they're definitely the biggest ones over there at the moment. And the film stars Hiroshi Tanahashi, who is sort of like was their biggest star for the last like 10 or so years, and the last few years is like kind of getting to like the crescent of his career. The simplest way to describe Hiroshi Tanahashi is that he is basically like the Japanese equivalent to John Cena. Like they're both around the same age, they both were mega baby faces for the majority of their careers, and they both were the face of their respective companies for a long length of time at around the same length of time. Tanahashi is like this super charming, friendly, like upbeat, you know, like long hair, like exciting, you know, pro wrestler, like the epitome of like a good guy. So for him to take this like foray into acting, which is not the first time he's acted, he's been in like Kamen Rider episodes and some other stuff, like he's kind of a big geek. To see him make the jump from wrestling into acting, where he's playing like the opposite of himself, is really interesting. Like usually speaking, when wrestlers jump to TV or movies, they don't, you know, they kind of get typecast, they kind of just do their shtick, but like with a different name. Like that's kind of how The Rock started out, sort of how John Cena started out. So it's kind of cool to see him take what is actually kind of like a challenging role here. In the movie, Tanahashi plays Takashi Omura, a professional wrestler who is sort of at like the end of his career and is a heel. He's like a bad guy. Omura plays a figure called Cockroach Mask, who's just like a mass bug, villainous like creature wrestler that everybody hates. It's not just that he's a bad guy in wrestling, it's also that he's like an underneath, like low card, like non-existent, unimportant bad guy. He's like nobody. When people see him, they hate him, but also they don't think about him when he's not around. What the film lets us know is at the beginning of his career, Omura actually was literally like Tanahashi when he started out. He was a babyface. He was like gonna skyrocket into like real big fame and be like a really big star, and he was very briefly, but then an injury kind of ruined his career, and for the rest of his life he's been, you know, slowly degrading and now can only wrestle under this mask with this kind of shitty character. The movie is less about him, however, than it is about his son. So the film really stars Takashi Omura's son, Shota, who is this like really cute, adorable little boy who doesn't know what his dad does for a living. He has no idea. Like, he loves his dad, he looks up to him, they're like besties. All the other kids in school are pressuring him to find out what his dad does because the other kids see the mystery around what his father does for a living as evidence that his dad's like in like the mafioso. Like they think his dad's like a yakuza. So to prove the kids wrong, his Shota basically like follows his dad to work one day and discovers that his dad's a pro wrestler. Not just any pro wrestler, he discovers his dad is a heel, he's a bad guy. All the other kids that like wrestling cheer this other guy, Dragon George, who is played by New Japan's current ace, Kazuchika Okada, who's playing like a cartoonier version of his real self. And they all hate Cockroach Mask. Obviously, he's a guy who wrestles under Cockroach Mask. Once he finds this out, like it creates this terrible, like depressing rift between father and son, and then, you know, Omura becomes even more depressed about his lot in life because his son's ashamed of him. So ashamed of him, in fact, he starts telling the other kids at school that Dragon George is his real dad, which leads to a whole bunch of other weird hijinks and such. And it's really just a depiction of what it's like to be the child of a pro wrestler. Other stories and books and things about being the kid of a pro wrestler are usually very depressing, because even like moderately famous pro wrestlers typically went on the road for years and just did like cocaine and cheat on their wives. So like being this child of a pro wrestler, unless you also go into pro wrestling, is like a very depressing venture. But here it's not quite so full-blown, like disillusionment. It's more just about the father-son relationship and how it's fractured by this uncomfortable truth. What I think is special about the movie is that it doesn't full-on tell you that wrestling is 100% real, kind of how when you watched WWE Netflix The Main Event, like it just makes you think this is like a real physical like contest and stuff, and it's kind of odd. Here, it never blatantly tells you it's real or it's fake. It acknowledges that it's sort of like there is an artifice to it, that there are people with good guy roles and bad guy roles, but it doesn't like get too into the nitty gritty of them like calling finishes and like talking to each other, any of that stuff. It presents it sort of the way a child would understand it. Like, no one ever looks the kid in the face and is like, your dad's not really getting hurt. It's not like that far. It's just more like, there's a spectacle at play here. One of the most important characters in the movie, aside from the fact that like every other New Japan Pro Wrestler shows up in some kind of cameo in the background, either as facsimiles of themselves or other small roles, is that Shota meets this like young magazine reporter named Michiko, who is like an actual honest-to-God like fangirl. Every recent movie or thing I've seen about like pro wrestling like really misses like what pro wrestling fandom is like, especially the Main Event. Like it showed these kids loving wrestling and stuff, but like the adult figures in the movie did not behave the way adult figures really behave when they watch pro wrestling. Here, this one character is like the personal physical embodiment of what modern pro wrestling fans are like. She's like very odd. Her coworkers like don't understand her and like can't seem to get into the fact that she likes wrestling. She has like a weird encyclopedic knowledge of like a bunch of wrestling things. So she's sort of like uniquely positioned to be the person to explain to Shota what is going on in his father's life. They have like a chance encounter where Shota tries to steal her Dragon George autograph so he can like prove to the kids that Dragon George is his dad. And she runs into him with his dad. Like his dad shows up, and she, because she's a nerd, recognizes Tanahashi as Takashi Omura, this like foreign babyface. So when she figures out that this kid's dad is Cockroach Mask, she realizes, oh, Cockroach Mask is actually Takashi Omura, which like none of the wrestling fans like seem to know that. That's like it would be kind of like shameful to find out that this one star is now doing this lowly role. So she gets her magazine editor to like let her write about the Z1 tournament, which is sort of a play on New Japan's actual G1 Climax tournament that happens every year. And because of a series of people getting injured and hurt, Cockroach Mask ends up in the tournament. And it creates this like, the entire second half of the movie is like this big ongoing tournament where Omura has to choose between like doing his actual job, which is being a bad guy, stoking the crowd's anger, and putting over babyfaces, versus trying to make his son proud of him. And also sort of like, he misses the limelight. Like they create a lot of real tension and pathos out of like this sad thing. Like imagine you're like the top of the world and then you're just like a schmuck and your son pretends he doesn't even know you in public. It's like, that's so sad. So the movie does this really cool job of extrapolating what works about pro wrestling and like what we like about it if you're actually a wrestling fan, and then doing it in movie form in a way that isn't like odd or off-putting. There's not too much inside baseball. If you don't know how pro wrestling works, like you're not going to need to be explained. The actual movie just functions. It kind of reminds me of like, you don't have to know a lot about boxing for like Creed or the Rocky movies to work. You don't have to know a lot about certain sports for really good sports movies to work. This kind of functions like that. And I was really, really, really into it because for the most part, the second half of the film is just a series of pro wrestling matches that are like shortened and filmed. And they're really entertaining. One of the bummer things about pro wrestling during the quarantine era currently is that all wrestling that is new and airs just doesn't have crowds. Like they're all empty arena things. I talked about it in my WrestleMania video. And the further and further we go into this era, more and more wrestling promotions are putting on these shows that just don't feel like pro wrestling. Because even though the guys are in the ring and they're doing the action and stuff, there's just no crowd. There's no crowd for them to feed off of. And the actual art of pro wrestling is just more alive in-person art, and the wrestlers in the ring are choosing what to do next and how to do it based on the crowd reaction. So there's no crowd, there's nothing to feed off of, and what you're watching just becomes more hollow. And this movie, to me, really captures what is important about the crowd reaction, about the crowd response. It isn't about the wins and losses or what moves everyone does. It's about the body language and the facial expressions and the character work and how that makes these kids, these adults, this whole crowd genuinely feel. What really surprised me about the movie, beyond once I realized like, oh, this is actually like a genuine movie with like actual good pacing, strong dialogue, pretty okay cinematography, like it looks decent. everything about it felt like a real movie to me, but I was really surprised by how good the performances were from Tanahashi and a few of the other wrestlers. Tanahashi, as a pro wrestler, is someone who's like, he has like a mutable tone to like his in-ring character, but ultimately he's still always like sort of like a larger-than-life, really positive, like friendly, like guy. He's done little things to stay current and to, you know, have his character evolve as his position in the promotion's larger setting like changes over the years. But he's still kind of always been like Tanahashi. He's the ace of the universe. He's like this big, like, gloating, friendly guy. So when you first see him in the movie, you see him as his younger self, and his younger self is literally just Tanahashi with different trunks, like the same moves, the same everything. And it's like, oh, that's just Tanahashi. Okay, whatever. But once it cuts to present day and you see him walking around day to day as like this sullen father, like being late to like his son's like, you know, like event at school and just looking just out of place. Like it's actually, you buy that he's like this guy. It doesn't feel like he's like faking it or incapable of adequately pretending, you know what I mean? And once you see him as Cockroach Mask in the ring even, it's like, as a wrestling fan, it's fun watching a guy who never got like a real heel run doing heel stuff. Like he slinks around the ring, he does all the like eye gouging and like, you know, spraying people with like, you know, like this like bug spray thing. And it's really funny. It's actually really cool. And you can tell that he's like ultimately good. His character anyway is good at pro wrestling in such a way that he can be a good guy or a bad guy. It's just that you can't always be the good guy. You can't always be the on top guy. Every sports movie kind of does that thing where like, you know, there's a cool lesson to be learned from not winning the big championship. But I think this movie does it better than many, honestly, and it really took me by surprise. There are a few times where I think the movie gets a little bit too goofy, particularly with the cameos. Like, there's a really cool sequence, you know, like I mentioned earlier, where Shota is like trying to steal this autograph. He bumps into like Tetsuya Naito, and Naito says like his like catchphrase and stuff, and that was like kind of a little bit too kitschy for me. But everyone else gets used really well. Ryusuke Taguchi shows up as Tanahashi's like partner, and he plays like a funny like, you know, guy who's fine being a heel. Trent Beretta, of all people, shows up in the movie as like a, you know, like a fast talking like, you know, American wrestler. And everyone involved like just really plays their parts to a T. And it kind of makes me think about like, if you're into wrestling, there's an ongoing gag amongst like kind of misguided like smart wrestling fans, which is that like American wrestling is like a joke, like WWE is like it's not like real wrestling, and it's too cartoonish and stuff, and like in Japan everything's like real and serious. And it's just odd to me that when WWE makes a movie, something like The Main Event or like other movies based around like wrestling, they are kind of like broad and a little bit comedic. And here, New Japan Pro Wrestling, often somewhat falsely known to be like a more serious product, they make a movie and it's like an art house take on the material, you know? And I thought it was really cool. I mean, like I don't believe in those differentiations. I think they're silly. But to me, I thought it was really cool that they did make this movie, and it does function like a real movie. It doesn't feel like something I have to like explain to someone before I put it on, or like apologize that we're watching a wrestling thing. Like it just works. And it does so without being needlessly dour, like something like Darren Aronofsky's The Wrestler, which is an incredible movie, but it's just so depressing, and like nothing about that movie shows you like the good part of being a wrestler. It's just like straight up like fucking tragedy. So this is a really cool like companion piece. Like if you like The Wrestler and you want to watch a movie that's like a little bit more upbeat but is not also like ready to rumble, then like My Dad is a Heel Wrestler is like the perfect movie for that. And it really makes me think that now that his career is winding down because his body's beginning to fail him, that Hiroshi Tanahashi, if he so chose, could go into a real life of acting. Like I don't know if he's going to pop up in like more art house fare, if he's going to stick to more like kid-friendly stuff or like action adventure stuff, but you know, he could do it. And I mean, it shouldn't surprise me because Hiroshi Tanahashi can do anything. So yeah, that's my review of My Dad is a Heel Wrestler. It is currently streaming on New Japan World, which is New Japan's streaming platform, kind of like their version of the WWE Network. I don't know if it's going to end up being on like Netflix or Prime or anything like that later. I can't find anywhere to like rent it otherwise, but for 9.99 yen a month, you can have access to New Japan World, which also has a lot of really great wrestling from the last several years and beyond that. So if you like wrestling and you want to dig this movie, you should subscribe and watch it, because also you can go back and watch a bunch of really great wrestling, since all of the new wrestling that's coming out is awkward and weird and crowdless. Thanks for watching. I've got another video coming out later this week as well, so if you have not subscribed, please subscribe. Please hit the little bell icon so you get notifications when I do put out new videos. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, you can give it a thumbs down. We appreciate fair voting around here. And yeah, thank you guys for watching. Everyone stay safe, be good to yourselves, and have a great day. Bye.